The Islamist-backed Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi drastically losing the support of his cabinet, along with the sympathies of the public. At least 5 ministers resigned amid anti-government protests, which were joined by millions. And the military, though, promising to deploy on Tahrir Square, but this time to guard the demonstrators. The latest report from Cairo and RT's Beltrue.
In the early hours of Tuesday morning, the Egyptian president finally responded to an ultimatum by the military, giving him 48 hours to fulfill the demands of the people, otherwise they would intervene. The president admitted that he didn't know about the military ultimatum before it was released and slammed the language of the statement as confusing and vague. He emphasized that he was working towards national reconciliation and that the greatest thing to come out of the January 25 revolution was a democratic, civilian state. However, he is losing support within his own administration. In the early hours of Tuesday morning, we heard that there was the final resignation of the foreign minister. This follows 4 other resignations of his cabinet, all saying they're in support of the protests against the president. Meanwhile, hundreds of thousands of people returned to the streets of Egypt for a second day, calling for the ouster of Morsi, like those behind me at the presidential palace. This happened across the nation. People are fearing there will be more violence. There are rumours abounding that the military will intervene in the background of a continuing violence. The military, for their part, obviously released this ultimatum, but have said that they will not get involved in politics. Meanwhile, Islamist supporters of the president are saying that he was legitimately elected and therefore he can only be removed from office through the ballot box. They are saying that they're rejecting calls for early elections. The Muslim Brotherhood spokesperson, for his part, said that they will not have early elections, that the president must fulfill his 4 years in office. This comes against the backdrop of a lot of violence towards the Muslim Brotherhood group. A number of their headquarters have been ransacked and firebombed, leading to several fatalities. They have instead said they will have their own counter-protests across the country in the coming days. There have been calls for them to come to the streets. So what we're seeing now is a divided Egypt between those who are supporting the president, maintaining that he is legitimate. They will come to the streets and back him, even though the military has released this controversial ultimatum. Meanwhile, the opposition figures are saying that they won't stop until Morsi is ousted. The grassroots campaign who initially called for these protests to Marod or rebel, they've said they will have mass stages of civic disobedience if he stays in office. So really we're seeing a continued deadlock with the military getting involved as well.
RT's Beltrue there in Cairo. And Mark Almond, historian and Middle East expert, he says the army's decision to step into the conflict may well, at the end of the day, do more harm than good.
It seems very much that the army is essentially trying to determine the future, and that could well be a return to the past, because what is very striking is that there isn't an obvious alternative to Morsi. There isn't a clear figurehead for the opposition. So even if Morsi was to resign, there's nobody automatic to take his place, not least because the Constitutional Court had invalidated the elections to the parliament. So that we're having in Egypt a very, very difficult situation. There's only one person with any kind of democratic legitimacy, that's the president, and his own legitimacy is now under attack from huge crowds in the streets and from the army and the police who've refused to defend himself and his party. But whoever comes to power, or if Morsi stays in power, it's difficult to see that the basic problems of great poverty, dwindling resources coming into the country, terrible problems about paying for the import of vital resources, including food, that those can easily be resolved whoever is in power.